I'm Jill Snitcher, Executive Director of the Columbus Bar Association. Judge Ted Barrows was recently inducted into the Ohio Veterans Hall of Fame. He joins 20 inductees with the 2021 class. He also joins 915 other Ohio service members who were inducted since 1992. Judge Barrows joined the Army right out of high school in 1965 and was honorably discharged in 1968 as staff sergeant. He's continued to work with former service members at risk through his work on the Military and Veterans Services Court and through his tenure as a judge in the Franklin County Municipal Court. His dedication to community and service shows just how terrific our local bench is. While we're sad to see Judge Barrows retire, we want to take an opportunity to thank him for his service. With the help of Columbus Bar Media Services, we recently had an opportunity to sit down with Judge Barrows and discuss his military service and career accomplishments. We hope you will enjoy this.
My name is Judge Ted Barrows. I work at the Franklin County Municipal Court as the administrative and presiding judge. My childhood was an interesting one because by the time I was 13 years old, we'd lived in 11 different places. My father got transferred, got promoted, changed jobs, got fired once, and so we moved all up and down the East Coast. I was born in Maine, my first sister was born in Virginia, and my younger sister was born in upstate New York. We lived as far south as Charlotte, North Carolina. Finally came back to the Hartford, Connecticut area, a suburb of Hartford, which was where I graduated from high school in 1965. When I was in high school, I was determined that I wanted to go to the United States Military Academy at West Point and become a career soldier. I didn't get accepted to the military academy. I knew that every year out of the ranks, the Army sends a certain number of people to West Point. So I thought, here's my chance. It may be a long shot, but what the heck? So in 1965, age 17, with the permission of my parents, I enlisted in the United States Army. Went through basic training and advanced infantry training. My father was a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division during the Second World War, and I wanted to follow in his footsteps. So I requested jump school and told them that I was second generation. My father's history in the military is not the same as mine. He enlisted at the beginning of the Second World War. He wanted to be a pilot, but his vision wasn't good enough. He became an officer. He fought in Europe near the Battle of the Bulge at Nijmegen, Holland, a bridge too far. And he was in that fighting. He was in North Africa. He landed in Salerno, Italy, and fought there too. He was decorated. He was wounded, although he always told us it was an accidental shooting during training. And I never believed him, but to the end of his life, I couldn't press him too far for it. And then when the war got over, he got out. He had no interest in a career in the military. He went to college at Maine, University of Maine, in chemical engineering, and that was his career. Everyone in the 82nd Airborne Division must maintain their jump qualification. So we would go out. They had some things planned for us, but you only had to jump once every 3 months to stay qualified. But we were young and didn't have a lot of money, so we used to go out on Saturday where they would have helicopters who take all the officers up, and they would jump out and get their jump instead of having to load on a C-130 with a whole bunch of smelly troops. And we'd go out there and we'd just volunteer, and we'd do a couple, 3 jumps on a day. So by the end of my 3 years, I had 55 jumps. By the time I'd been in the Army for 6 months, I decided it was not the career that I wanted after all. So I finished out my 3 years in the United States Army and was able to use the GI Bill to pay part of my tuition at Bates College in Lewiston, Maine, where I went and did undergraduate studies with a major in what they call government, which is political science, and a minor in English. And I got to my senior year and I'm scratching my head and said, you know, the only thing I'm qualified for at this point is to go teach. And I didn't think that sounded like what I wanted to do. So a couple of friends of mine said, well, why don't you go take the law boards? And I said, what's that? Well, you take an LSAT. So they were offering it at Colby College, which is in a different town. So the 3 of us drove over there, got a room for the night, went out drinking, and we took the test the next day. One of my friends didn't do very well on the test at all, but I scored higher than I had any reason to expect. So when I got my results, I talked to my advisor, and he said, you'll go to Yale, you'll go to Harvard, look at these things. And I said, well, wait a minute, slow down. So I got married at the end of my college years. And so my wife and I talked about graduate school and law school. And I said, let's go to graduate school for you first, and then we'll go to law school later. So it was delayed for several years, but I eventually came here to The Ohio State University to go to law school. So that's how I got to be a lawyer. When I got here, I worked, I had a job for a couple of years with an agency that provides support to small county public defenders. It was called the Public Defender Association. And so on our board of directors was James Curra, who was the Franklin County Public Defender at the time. My boss, Meg Tieford, knew that I wanted to be a public defender or a legal aid lawyer. And so when I was getting, she mentioned to Curra that I'd like a job. He offered me the job, and I took it. 1978, I think the salary was $6,700 a year. And so I was a public defender for 3 years. I went in private practice for 2 years. I was a failure because I'm not a business person at all. And then one day, Mr. Curra called me up and he said, I hear you're having trouble in the private practice. And I said, yeah. And he said, you want to come back? I had no reason for him to ever offer me the job back, but I came back. I enjoyed public defender work. That's probably the best work I've ever done. After a while there, then I got an offer to go to the State Attorney General's office. I worked in the Consumer Protection section for about 9 years. I learned civil law while I was there. And then my friend Janet Jackson got appointed to be the city attorney, and she was going to hire some people. She wanted to hire a chief prosecutor. So I applied for the job. I was interviewed by Tony Celebrezzi, of all people, and a couple of other folks. And I didn't get the nod. They hired Steve McIntosh, who's now a common pleas court judge. But about 3 weeks later, I got a call from Janet Jackson. She said, do you still want to come and work for me? And I said, well, let me think about it for about a second. Yes. And so she hired me as the first assistant. So Mac and I worked together, like side by side for about 7 years, and it was one of the best experiences I've ever had. Fine man, one of the best I've ever met. At the end of that period of time, I thought it might be time for me to take a shot at running for judge. And the first time I went to ask Janet if I could do that, because that's what you do in politics, she said, who do you want to run against? And I told her, and I said, nope, you can't run against him. He's a friend of mine. I backed on down. The next time I had an opportunity, she said, go for it. I ran against a woman who was also a friend of mine who had been appointed by the governor. She had worked on the governor's staff and been appointed by the governor. So and she'd only been on the bench for like 5 months by the time the election came around. So she and I ran. I enjoyed campaigning. It was evident to me that she really didn't enjoy it that much, and I was successful. It was a long shot. People I talked to said, you don't have a snowflake's chance in hell of winning, and I did. And so that's where I've been for the last 18 years, and best job in the world. I became interested in the possibility and I knew that there were other veterans courts that were springing up around the state and around the country, and I was interested in it. And I started thinking about and planning how I would go about doing it. Scott Vanderkar, who's cleverer than I am, just went to the county commissioners and said, give me some more money and I'll start a veterans court. And he did it. So I was a little bit disappointed. I was glad he got it started. I was a little disappointed, but I sucked it up. And then a couple of years later, he said, the Supreme Court is setting rules for these things now. We're going to have to follow the rules. It's going to be more complicated. I can't handle all 3 of these courts myself. I want you to take this one over. And I said, okay. So I got involved with the Military and Veterans Service Specialized Docket, and it's just been an amazing transformation. The way it's set up is it's voluntary, so that the defendant and or his or her lawyer have to say, we think this is a good idea for you. And it's tough. I mean, some of these cases are ones where a person would just go plead guilty in front of a judge and pay a fine and maybe be on probation for a couple of years. But our program requires them to attend every week for at least the first 3 or 4 months. And then depending on their progress, they can come every other week. And then depending on their progress, they can come every 3rd week and eventually once a month. It's intensive probation, which means we get into their case every time. We know what they're doing. We want to know what their aspirations are. we have availability, all kinds of services. The VA is with us at the table. So any services that the VA has, if this veteran has not linked up with the VA, we get them linked up right away, because there's a lot of things that are benefits that they can use. We also have other social service agencies for drug counseling and other kinds of things. We don't require somebody to have an honorable discharge. So we have a number of people who are not eligible for VA services. One of the things we do for them is look into whether we can get their discharge upgraded. In addition to myself, I have 2 coordinators that are employed by the court. They maintain weekly contact with these folks in between the court sessions. They make sure that they understand what their schedule is, that where they have to go and what they have to do. And sometimes they're a sounding board. And we have a probation officer who's from our probation department who's assigned to the MAVS court. So all of our folks are on probation to her. So that's a team of 3 that are like, and then me. And it's like, we just kind of wrap around these guys. Not everybody is successful. Some people try it out for a while and say, I just don't want to do this anymore. And that's okay, because it is voluntary. And I tell people that. If it's too tough, if you can't handle it, I'll let you out of here. You'll still be on probation for a couple of years, but you don't have to be here. Nobody has to be here. And I think that makes some of them feel more comfortable about being there because it's their choice. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it. The most rewarding part about working with veterans is that by and large, most of them have suffered trauma while in the military. And here's my stock speech that I tell people when I talk about this. The United States military takes months to train people up to be the best equipped, most serious fighting force in the world. Best equipment, best training, best men and women, and sends them off. When they get done with what's a harrowing experience in combat that no one should ever have to go through, that human beings aren't constructed for, they don't give them months of training about how to come back to civilian life. They give them a paycheck and a pat on the back and say, go on. Now, these highly trained, mostly young men, who are taught that they can do anything, and they've survived almost anything, come back, and they're not fitting in very well. They don't recognize that they need help because they can tough it out, because they're tough. They're tough as nails, and the suicide rate is terrible. So what gives me the real heart for it is we can get folks and first of all bring them in, tell them that we love them. We don't use those words because it wouldn't work out too well. But tell them that we love them, and then get them to realize that they can have help, and it doesn't make them a lesser human being, and they can deal with some of the issues that may have brought them to court because they're self-medicating. They wake up in the night in cold sweats. A car backfire and causes them to dive under the bed. They do horrible things to people they love, and they don't have a good explanation for it. We all kind of know what the explanation is. It's post-traumatic stress. And there are modalities to treat that. If people will come to that place, they can come out better people, and their lives can be better. And that's what's done it for me, is the possibility of helping people have a better life, who've given so much, who just like me held up their hand and swore to defend the Constitution of the United States. Yep. I was recently inducted into the Ohio Military Veterans Hall of Fame, which again I think was the nomination probably came from my crew. I also happen to know a couple of people that are on the board and have worked with them in various capacities, so I think I may have gotten a leg up there. But when I heard the stories of all of the other 9 inductees that were there, stories of heroism in battle, a doctor who's 96 years old and still practicing and served in the Second World War. I mean, I'm thinking to myself, I'm a lawyer who got lucky enough to be a judge and then lucky enough to take on this Veterans Court. But other than that, there's a million GIs who served during the Vietnam War. Some of them didn't come home. Some of them came home shot up. I came home and went to college and went to law school and have lived a good life. It was hard for me to put myself in the same pantheon with these other folks that were being inducted when I heard their stories. I was appreciative of the honor. I mean, I don't denigrate the honor. I'm just not sure that I set a standard for that. They had an induction ceremony for the Ohio Veterans Hall of Fame, and it took place at the Veterans Memorial over on Broad Street. It's a beautiful building. Anyone who hasn't been there should go. It's very emotional, I think, for anybody who especially has been in the service to go through it and see the displays. The ceremony itself took place in a large hallway right off the entrance, and it was attended by the governor. The governor actually handed out the diplomas, and General Ashenhurst put on the medals around people's neck. There was press and media coverage there. There were families. My crew, the people who work with me at the court, were there with me, as well as a number of others. My wife came, and my grandson came. And then they called our names one by one. We went up and shook hands with the governor, and were given a medal, and then took a seat. Alphabetically, I was the first one. So I sat there and kind of, watching and listening to all of these other stories. It was pretty impressive. It was very emotional. And I think it's a good thing that they do that. They honor a number of people every year. Apparently it's regional. There were 10 at this one. There are another 10 who will be honored at different regional ceremonies as time goes on. My time at the court is coming to an end. There's a state statute that says if you hit 70 years old, you can finish your term in office, but you're not allowed to run for another one. And I'm in that category. So on December 31st, my term will end. My wife has been retired for 10 years. And she's had the house to herself 5 days a week for most of those 10 years. So I think there's going to be an adjustment. I took a staycation in October, stayed home for a whole week. It went very well. We did some things together. We did some things separately. Her computer's in one room and my computer's in another room. And I think we got along okay. So on that front, I'm sure there will be some adjustments, but it's going to be good. There is a thing that you can do if you retire as a judge, and it's called sitting by assignment. So that if a judge in another community is taking 2 weeks of vacation, that court doesn't close down. The Supreme Court will assign a retired judge to go and stay there for the 2 weeks and take care of business. So I'm looking forward to the possibility of doing that as well. As I understand it, the Supreme Court requires you to do that, be available for that 13 weeks a year. By my calculation, that'll finance 2 more scuba diving trips every year. So that's part of my plan, is to stay active and scuba dive a little bit more. Also, it'll free me up during the daytime to do more of the volunteer work that in my local community that the Kiwanis Club does. I will be able to go and volunteer at the food bank on Tuesdays or Thursdays, spend a couple of hours doing that, which I was on their board of directors for a couple of years. It's got my heart. And people need food, and this is a way that all of us can give back. And I'm sure that I'll find other opportunities, but the best advice I got so far from somebody who is retired is don't take on too many things right away. Take it easy, see how it works out. If another opportunity comes up and you've got the time and the heart for it, go for it. But don't say yes to 6 things all at once. You may be sorry. And that's good advice. So I'm going to take it easy. I'm going to segue into it.